Sometimes it seems like the only way that people on the internet know how to talk about guitar repair is by telling you what tools to buy and where to get them and link below. I'm not going to tell you that that's not a good way to learn, but I will say that it's not really a useful way for most people, myself included. When I was starting to repair guitars 20 some odd years ago, uh, I didn't have any money to spend on anything. I actually still don't have any money to spend on anything, so I try to get by where I can, as I'm sure you do too. But, there's really two schools of thought. There's go to StewMac or Luthier's Mercantile and buy a specialty tool. And the thing you have to understand about tools is they don't exist in a vacuum. They don't come from nowhere. They don't just pop into the mind of someone on a whim. They come from having a need and a purpose. And in our case, they pretty much come from using regular off-the-shelf tools, like, say, for example, this tri-corner file. Nothing special. $5-10 at your local hardware store. And someone realizing that there's a small modification you can do to make it work better for guitars, and then somebody like StewMac goes and looks at that and says, well, how can we make this either something that we sell just with that certain modification done and mark it up because it required handwork or whatever, or they make a purpose-built tool for it. So there's two schools of approaching this stuff. One is understanding what your needs are, what's available, and how you can transform what's available into what you need. And the other is just buying a tool that does what it says on the box. Neither is better than the other, but one is certainly a lot less expensive. And what you'll find is that time and money, as with everything, they're kind of at the opposite end of the possibility spectrum. So if you want to spend the money, you'll spend a lot less time screwing around with tools trying to figure out how to get what you have to do what you want. But part of being good at using tools and understanding, even basically what goes into repair or building, is that time you spend not getting the result you want and deconstructing why. That's an important point. But I'm not going to go into all that in too much detail today, because what I want to point out to you is that, you don't have to buy all of the special files, all the special tools. You don't have to do all that stuff to start working on frets, right? And most people who are going to be looking at this video are probably not professionals. They may aspire to be at some point. But presuming that that's the case, we'll proceed as if you don't have any of the special tools you need, or want, rather, and you have limited knowledge of how to do what needs to be done on a guitar, but have at least some knowledge of how to operate in a workshop, right? If you don't know how to run a belt sander or whatever, you might want to do that first. Get a few birdhouses under your belt before you start trying on this. But like I said, this file, $5-10 at a store. You can buy them on Amazon if you feel like it. This handle, you can buy them in multi-packs. They're not great. In fact, they're pretty poorly made, but they fit the hand. They do the job. And together, you now have a complete tool. A little super glue, a little epoxy, whatever. Tap it on the end with a hammer. You've got a tool. So I'm going to set this aside and show you one of my favorite tools for fretting. It's a block of wood with a piece of leather glued to it. I didn't even bother planing the back. This could be any kind of wood you want. In fact, softwoods are great. Hardwoods are okay too. I use this a lot for if I'm hammering on something or I need to set this under a neck or a body to get it up off the bench. Great tool. Very overlooked and inexpensive. You can buy some tooling leather, a big roll of it, and have that around, and some contact cement. And you will be surprised the uses you can come up with for that. In fact, I have another one right here that I've used as a sanding block, right? Got cork on one side in case I need to, use it as like a caul or something for pressing stuff in. You can also sand with that side. It's just a piece of 2x4 that I cut down. Put the same leather that's on here on it. I dyed it just for fun. And I also put that same leather around this tool handle. Now, I'm not a great leather worker. In fact, you can see I'm pretty terrible. But what you'll notice is that it fits my hand. That's what's important. Looks are secondary, but you can see it snugs right in there, does exactly what I need it to. All right. And this right here is actually an example of not always getting what you pay for. I'm going to scoot these guys aside. So this is, in disguise, the StewMac fret end file, right? The pertinent information about it is that it's basically just a two-sided file, right? The edges are ground. One is kind of a rounded safe edge here, you can see. And the other is flat and shiny. Neither will mark up the fingerboard, and you go around the edge of a fret to knock the corners off, or do those semi-hemispherical looking ends, which takes forever, but looks great. This file wasn't doing what I needed it to do because it was tiny, and I have hands that are not tiny. I couldn't hold on to it. It was slipping out of my fingers, and when you do this stuff, your hands will hurt. That's a fact. How much they hurt depends on you and your anatomy, but your hands are going to be sore. In fact, you might get to the point where you're like me and you couldn't even open a jar or anything to get so bad. And then you have to start adjusting your tools. Even if you pay, I don't know, however much this thing is now. It's probably like $80 now or some shit like that. But I dipped it in Plastidip about 1 million times to get it up to a reasonable size. Gave it some cush because it's only just barely larger than this itself. And then I wrapped it in that leather just to give it a little extra for me to hold on to, right? You can see I don't really need to close my hand around it to make that work. Now that file, sure, you could buy that, and it does one thing. But we are also going to need to buy maybe one of these, or maybe a set of those. This is the StewMac diamond crowning file. It has 2 grits, and it's nice. It still doesn't solve my ergonomic problem because it still disappears in my hand and I end up gripping onto this. So you can kind of hold it like that, but I think it sucks. These are really uncomfortable too. I think the handle needs to be sawn off and some grip put on here. But you know what? You can pay the, gosh, I don't know what this costs now. Maybe $100, maybe $90. I'll have to check. Maybe I'm way overinflating, but you can buy one of these known as the Ibanez files, even though they're not made by Ibanez. And you can buy this and be pretty good with most things, right? Or you can do just as I said before, get that 3-corner file, toss it into a handle. Now, something interesting about this file is that you'll notice the edges are shiny, and that is because I took them over to a grinder. You can use whatever abrasive you choose. I used a bench grinder, and I ground these edges, ground them safe so they're nice and smooth. They can ride on a piece of wood. They're not going to mark it up. And with this guy, I can do the ends of the frets. I can do fret crowning. Takes more skill, but you can do it. I can do any size fret I want. In fact, I can do any job that needs a file. I even file the back of pots to make soldering to them easier, just to give it a little more grip. And this cost me probably about $10, right? These together, I'm probably in at least 150 for. And do you know which one I use all the time? This one. I go back and I use this one after I'm done using all these, because I find that these do okay work and they get it close, but they leave a lot of texture, which right now chatter is the name of it. It's kind of a, well, once you start with this, you'll get familiar with it because you'll look at your fret and say, what are all those crazy looking marks in there? And that is file chatter. And then I have to go and remove it with this, right? $10, over $100. Still had to customize. Which would you rather do? Here, I made one for you. So that's first in the list. All you really need to get started is this guy. Not hard. So let's move on to some other stuff that you commonly see, especially commercially available things. We'll go with leveling tools. This is from Crimson Guitars. The only reason I like this tool, I think the shape of it is terrible. And if they had any sense at all, they'd make it so that the big end was in your hand so you could go that way. But they don't, and now you have to do this, which gives you this horrible pinchy little grip. And you can see how much space is in there between the actual tool and my hand. It causes a lot of pain. I don't like it. This is a leveling beam. It bears a striking resemblance to another tool you might be used to using, and that is a 12-inch level, which I can assure you will work just as well as this. But this one's pretty in blue, and it's got two flat edges, and I put sticky adhesive-backed tape, sandpaper on there, and that's how I usually level frets. I do some of the hogging off with this, and then I'll do the finishing stuff with that. Another thing I'll use, and these are a little more handmade, I can't make out the name on that anymore. I think it's Ron Joseph Arts. All right, so I have 4 or 5 of these. These are radius blocks. You can make your own. You can get a hold of Ron Joseph. I paid a lot less for this than I did at StewMac, and let me tell you, it's a lot more comfortable. And it's pretty. Ooh. So those are some tools. Well, actually, hang on. There's a few more. And this, which I think is actually the most useless tool I've ever bought. I regret every penny I spent on it. This is a fret bar. Guess who? Now, I do love StewMac. Don't get me wrong. But this is designed to level the frets under the strings. You can see there's that sort of I shape, as in the letter, not the organ. And the strings go there, and this slides between them up and down the frets. Now, I've never actually had had any success using this in the intended manner because I always get frustrated. It doesn't do the work fast enough. It's not convenient enough. So I just rip the strings off and go at it with one of these two. You know, this one's my primary one. The only one I would get is this one. Again, I wouldn't buy this again. I wouldn't buy this again. Right? I don't need these two. The radius beams I don't even use for the fret part. I use it for fingerboards only because if your fingerboard's properly radiused, there's really no reason to go profiling your frets with that radius because once you level them, that's pretty well taken care of. And to be totally honest, it's really inefficient to try and use this because the frets are going to do what the frets are going to do. As long as they're in the same plane as each other, that's fine. So these two are great. This one you could replace with a 12-inch level from Home Depot. And I'm sure that you could actually use that for other things in life too. This one's just, before I knew that, I bought this, right? These are awesome. You probably don't need that right now. If you're just getting into fretwork, get some radius blocks later. But again, try to patronize people who, this is his business, right? This is great. I love it. You could still just use a level. That would be fine too. A level would cost you maybe 20 bucks tops. This cost me probably a lot more. Now, those other two, actually all of these can be replaced by this one, which will cost you one piece of wood and a file that you're not particularly attached to. Here it is. This is probably 1.5 or 1.25 square poplar. Ugliest wood that ever was. Sorry, poplar fans. To the back of it, you can see that I have glued, rather not glued, but stuck, that same abrasive. And on the other side, you can see that I have literally just used Type Bond, and I cut off the handle with a grinder. Actually, yeah, I think it might have been a hacksaw or something. It took a long time. But I glued this to this piece of wood. It's flat. It's a file. It's not going to bend. They machined it. So I'm not really worried about this being, out of plane or anything. It's going to stay that way pretty much forever. And the poplar is not really strong enough to make it do anything else. This tool will cost you, I don't know, maybe, depends on how good you are at working with stuff, but, a couple hours to make. And very few dollars. Cost of a file. You can use the scrap a 2x4, whatever you feel like. Whatever you got hanging around. I just happen to have this. And you know what? It really fits my hand. So this or this, you choose. I have all these, so I use them. That doesn't mean you have to go make my same financial errors. All right. Now, other things that have a hardware store equivalent. Let's take a look. Guess who? StewMac rebranded some, generic flush cut pliers, or end nippers rather, flush cut nippers. And then they ground the face down, and you can see right here that means that one edge is sharpened like a chisel and the other is flat, right? So it's flat across here, and that allows you to cut right up against something like that. All right, see, my finger's not getting cut, remarkably. I kind of thought it might. This looks pretty cool, and the jaws are nice and hard, which is really nice. There's only 1 or 2 chips in them. Now, you can pay StewMac however much they decide to charge this week for these, and that's great. I love them. I use these all the time for everything, including pulling frets out. I don't bother with those special ones, the tiny ones, because these do the job just fine. Or you can go Husky, Home Depot, right? Whatever big box store or tool supplier you have, you get these. And then you take them to the bench grinder or the belt sander or whatever you got, and you flatten them out. These are due for a reflattening, and maybe I'll go in and take a little off the edges here so that they're nice and crisp again and put them back into service. These aren't as hard, the steel, or if they were, I screwed them up. And I use these for a lot of rough stuff. In fact, I was using them to break off the heads of drywall screws, which explains a bunch of those nicks, because I don't care what happens to these. You don't have to care what happens to yours either. This costs you a lot less. When you're done or you decide you want to step up, get the StewMac ones. I did. I still have these. I still use them for other stuff, right? When this won't cut it, literally, I just use this. I even use this for cutting electrical wire when I'm in a hurry. It doesn't matter. It's still a useful tool, but it costs you a lot less. So there you go. Hardware store, equivalent of that. Another of my favorites in that category. This is a special, I don't actually remember who I bought it from. Yep, hang on, Stuart McDonald. This is so cheaply made. The head on it wobbles, right? There's no wedge in there, just really poorly made, okay? And the only reason you get these is because they have replaceable faces. And at the time when I bought it, I thought, ooh, you know, that's a great idea. I'm definitely gonna need that. But these are the same faces I've been using for years. I pretty much exclusively use the brass one, as you can see. Plastic one I use for almost nothing. And this hammer I find is too small to really get frets in. You know? That's nice. But you at home don't have to go buy a special tiny hammer. You could go to Home Depot and get a two-sided soft-headed mallet with replaceable faces. And you can also use that for, you know, knocking cabinets around and crap. Or, almost everybody at home has one of these. A hammer. There is nothing special about it. You can use a hammer like this. Or if you're really intrepid and you just feel like whacking shit, use a hammer like that. Doesn't matter. You can even use a smaller hammer. But don't hit the fret with the face of this. Just use a scrap of wood. Right? You can see right there, pretty good accuracy. I pop that down on the fret, give it a tap, goes right in. You have a hammer. If you don't have a hammer, you've got a heavy object, right? You can find a piece of wood like this anywhere. It doesn't even have to be straight. The two important pieces of that are it has one flat face and another flat face that are roughly parallel, right? I could use this little block of wood too if I felt like it. No reason not to. You don't need a special hammer. You don't need special plastic faces on it. You don't need a removable anything. You can just use this. It's not a big deal. And that takes the place of a lot of these guys. Now, I will say a fret press is something that on fretboards that are really tricky and maybe they've been refretted a few times, I like to make use of this. And I put this one in my drill press. It's meant for that. It's cheap. I got it on eBay or something. And they have interchangeable radiused cauls, right, with a little fret profile cut into them. And you use it to press the fret in evenly and sometimes hold it there, you know, while your glue dries or whatever. That can be nice if a fret seems to want to pop out. But really, if you're trying to do that and hammering it in doesn't work, something's wrong with either the fret slot itself. It's either too wide or too narrow, in which case you need to address that in a different way, and that's beyond the scope of this video. But you could take this, undo this little guy, pop that part out, and put a piece of threaded rod or cut the head off a bolt and put it in there, put the set screw back in, screw this into an arbor press or something if you have that. I mean, if you don't have a drill press and you do have an arbor press, you're a weird guy, but, you know, I've done things like that. Still don't have a bandsaw. I do it by hand. So, you know, that's one thing you can do with these. You don't need to buy the expensive ones. It's just not that big a deal. In fact, this particular one is already deforming, so a lot of good that did me. Let's see here. Some other things that can simply be replaced. This guy. I like this one. Hosco 0.4 millimeters. You can find saws that have like a 20 thou or a 22 thou kerf. The kerf is the width, not of the blade itself, that would be slightly less, but of the angle that the teeth are splayed this way and that to go in the cut, right? A saw kerf. This one, I like it. It's cheap, but you know it does the same job. This paring knife, it's kind of an interesting shape. It's made by Victorinox. It came in a pack of 4. The other 3 are doing duty in my kitchen right now. Any of those would be acceptable. I like that it has this curve on it. If you have another knife that you're not using and a grinder, you can make this knife. It's not important. It doesn't even have to look this way. But this guy goes in fret slots, and you clean out the glue, right, and kind of saw down, and that's helpful sometimes. But what also works is a knife that just goes in there like that. This requires a little more skill to use, the knife, but I use it for 75 other things in the shop. It's my main. I use it as a marking knife. I use it for, just about anything you can use a knife for other than opening boxes. I have crappier knives for that. This one's great. It works. It's awesome. I don't need this. I use this, but I don't need it, and you don't need it either. You can get a knife. Some things that people often think they need. Fret rubbers. Why? Literally, you can go and buy a pack of automotive sandpaper in various grits for $10 on Amazon. And you can take an eraser and wrap the sandpaper around it. Guess what you've got? Right, you can even buy a bigger eraser because, holy crap, look at this little thing. This tiny little thing. How are you supposed to grip this, right? Do you see how uncomfortable that is in my hand? Can you imagine doing this? Like 3 times, 3 different grits, right? Look at my thumb. Look at how much stress I'm putting into my hand doing that. This is not good, okay? Don't buy these, guys. You don't need them. They're just going to mess up your hands. Get the sandpaper. Be done with it. In fact, you can use that sandpaper on finishes too. So there's no reason to buy a specialized thing that doesn't do a job well and just hurts you. Two things actually that you do probably want and or need is this. It's called a notched straight edge. And this, which is a fret rocker. And if anyone's curious about the size on that, I'm just going to go ahead and put a scale right up to it so you can see that it's about 5 inches along this base. And the rest you can figure out yourself because you're smart and you'll take a screenshot and make your own. You can buy these all over the internet. It's really not that hard to make them accurate. If this piece of metal is something you have lying around and you've got a grinder, go and put it on the neck of your guitar, get a Sharpie and just go bloop, 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 where all the frets are, notch it out. It doesn't have to look pretty. They don't have to be square. They could just be awful, horrible grinder marks. No one cares. It's your tool, man. Do what you want. You can use a thick steel ruler and do the same to it. You can go to a machinist and have them make it. You can go to sendcutsend.com, make a pattern of one of these and have them send it to you made out of kryptonite or whatever you feel like. But honestly, this one's important. Buy it on Amazon. You don't have to buy it from StewMac. You can make one yourself. It doesn't have to be in this shape. It could just be, a series of different pieces that have these lengths, pretty close to those lengths anyway, and they could just be single, like a tiny thin bar or whatever. This is just easier to have one of. And you know what? You can email a machine shop that's near you and say, hey, can you make one of these for me out of, I don't know, whatever material you like. Doesn't matter. Then, if you did a really terrible job or whatever, you can go Grab that leveling beam, which I put somewhere. And because I know this is flat, I can run this. Well, actually, I probably would use the larger, longer one. If I need to true this up, right, I just do that. And then this will be totally flat again. Or at least we'll have the same error in both tools. That'll be hilarious. So these guys, very helpful. This one you absolutely need if you're doing frets. This one you can absolutely make if you're doing frets, as I think it's a little less critical if you're in the beginning stages to have this be a precision piece. Accurate, really good, but like nuclear reactor precision, not necessary. This guy, if you're dealing with bound fretboards, if you don't have a Dremel and infinite patience, or a tiny file, or just a bunch of minions to do work for you, this is a little fret tang nipper, and what it does is it nibbles away the tang of a fret. If you don't know what that is, you've probably got more research to do before you actually take any of my advice from this video. This one, I believe, was sold by Stuart McDonald, but as we can see, once we reveal, Klein Tools, Chicago, part number 76011B. Google that, you'll probably get it cheaper. This handle is just heat shrink tubing. It sucks. I hate using it, but, you know, whatever. This guy has a lot of different things you could do with it, and the secret here is that this part, this little anvil, and this little cutter are something you can change out. And this tool actually came from a different industry. You can see it'll do all kinds of other stuff. This is like a sheet metal nibbler type thing. So really, again, it's just adapted for special use. It's not something special and magical that the guys at StewMac just came up with out of thin air. You can do it too. Another thing that's really helpful, which I liked a lot, is a pencil cut in half. You use this to scribe the profile of the frets onto a nut blank. Let's see if I have one hanging around. I've got an already cut one. So you would scribe the profile of the frets on there, just laying it across the fingerboard, and that's where you would file your nut slot down to, is where this draws a line, etc. Very helpful. Costs you exactly one pencil to get. This fellow is a colossal disappointment. It is designed to make your fret wire go into a radius, which you can do with a pair of pliers and some patience, or your bare hands, or really just not bother at all. In many instances with like nickel fret wire, it's fine. Stainless, you absolutely will need something like this, but honestly, out of the gate, you can always just buy pre-radius stuff. It doesn't need to be, you know, special. Sometimes they'll sell it in a roll, and if you buy it in the roll, then it's already curved. It's probably curved to a sharper radius than whatever you're installing it in, so you're good to go there. Radiusing your fret wire, really not as big a deal as you think. As long as the radius is tighter than whatever the fretboard you're trying to put it into is, it'll do its job. You don't need this, but if you wanted to buy it, you could. You could also make it. There's plans online for those. This is made extremely poorly and cheaply by somebody on eBay, and most of the time I just want to throw it against the wall. I think I might do that later. Here's another honorable mention, because I see these a lot, and I kind of hate them and I kind of love them. You can make this yourself, right? This is a block of high-density polyethylene known as a milk jug or a bottle of soda or whatever other plastic thing that we now just dump into the ocean. With a file in a groove, which is just about the width of a table saw blade. Imagine that. 2 passes for this part, 1 pass for that part. You could do that at home if you have a table saw, Or if you have a circular saw in a front with a steady hand, grab a 2x4, bzzzt, bzzzt. Okay, you're done. That's all you needed to do. This doesn't need to be made out of special magic, okay? All right? This one's actually really crappy, and I hate it, but it costs very little. The StewMac one is very expensive, and I also hate it. I had to actually grind the edge of this file to be safe too, right? So for a tool you pay for, you still have to do handwork on it because they had sharp edges on their sharp corners, and that was digging into when I would go on a set neck guitar or like an acoustic, it was very close to destroying a few before I said, that's it, I'm fixing this. So this guy, you know what, this is just for trimming up fret ends, truing them, and then putting a bevel on them with 45 degrees. You can do that by hand. That's no problem. You can even do it with this guy that we already did. So, you know, nut files, those are important. Don't buy the expensive ones. You're not that good yet. These are fine. They're a spend. You don't need them right away, you know? These are just the Japanese ones. There you go. You can look at it. I don't know if there's a part number. No, there's no part number. But get a reasonable size. It's just you don't need much more than that, right? These are fine. These will take a 10. You can do that for an 8-gauge string. You can do that for, if you wiggle it, you can do it for an 11, or just use this 13, 56. You could probably, you know, screw around, get up to 60. Honestly, you could probably get a smaller set and just wing it, but you know, you may need these. I didn't buy them for a while, and I just found other really slim hardware store files that I used for cutting nuts, or I just had someone else do it. You know, there's no sense in trying to learn two skills at once, right? You either know how to cut a nut or you don't. That might be the place to start, and this might be the thing to spend. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, well, we got to wrap up. So let's wrap here. What do you actually need? Well, let's lay it out. Try not to spill my beer. Boy, we're going to have to try harder than that. We're going to assume that you're not fretting any bound necks today. Let's see, do I need anything else? Yeah, that pencil. Right, that helps. Maybe a Sharpie. See if I can grab a Sharpie here real quick. I think you know what they look like, but Sharpie. Masking tape. That's what you need. And some know-how. And you're going to learn because you'll watch shows on YouTube or wherever. Put those in there too. That looks pretty manageable, doesn't it? This is under $100 probably. There's no need to go and blow 3 paychecks at StewMac when you're not even good at this yet. So just find a way, make the tools, and I guarantee that you will be a far, 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 far better craftsman and a far better repairman, and have a deeper understanding of how these things work at the end of it than if you just bought the tools that worked right out of the box. This will test your problem solving, and it's just damn good fun. All right, you guys, take care. Be square. I'll see you later.